Hey everybody, I'm Ryan. Today we're going to look at my version of Mono Red Aggro in Standard. Now there doesn't seem to be a stock list yet, but this is the deck that I have had success with so far, and it has some pretty interesting card choices. Let me explain them to you. So Mono Red Aggro is exactly what it sounds like. It is a very aggressive, burn-heavy, hasty deck, just like it has been throughout Magic's history. To start with the lands, we have a ton of mountains, as you would expect. 2 Crystal Grotto, because it doesn't actually affect our mana that much. We don't have double red until turn 4, and we have no other double red in our deck. So the only time this is really bad for us if we see 2 of them, or we want to go double 1-drop and it's our only 2 lands, which doesn't happen a lot. So Crystal Grotto, just for the scry, is totally worth it. And you can filter it for red if you absolutely need to, if you have double. And then we play 2 Soken'Zons. 2 is fine in a 22-land deck. It's very unlikely to see both of them, and just having 2 more hasters to push through that extra last bit of damage, or to go just a little bit more wide, is valuable. To get into the actual deck, this is kind of like a medium red deck. It is not incredibly low to the ground. It is not quite big red. It's somewhere in the middle. It runs a lot, obviously, as you can see, it runs a lot of 2-drops and some big mana cards. It starts with Kamano Faces Kakazan. This needs to be run in every single red deck. It does everything red wants to happen. You play this on turn 1, it deals 1 damage. Turn 2, it pumps up your turn 2 play, which can either be one of our awesome 2-drops, or a Phoenix check that is hasty, a turn 2 haster, turn 2 2 power haster in the air is absolutely crazy because it also has recursion. You know, that's like a sick combo. And it's also a 2 power haster in and of itself. It flips into it on turn 3. It's probably our best turn 1 play. Phoenix Check is great because it combos with Kamano Faces Kakazan. There's also not a lot of great flyers in the format, so it is able to hit for 1 every single turn, even if you just play it on turn 1. And if they deal with it, has awesome recursion in the late game. Play with Fire is one of our 2 burn spells. It's a shock with a little bit of an upside in the scry one. This gets things out of the way. This burns our opponent's face if we absolutely need it to. And when it does burn an opponent's face, it can filter our draws. One kind of interesting play with this is if you absolutely need to draw something good this next turn, you have plenty of mana but used it all during your turn. When you untap before you draw, using it on your upkeep on your opponent to filter your next draw is an awesome play. Next up is Bloodthirsty Adversary. This does 2 things for us. Number 1, it's a 2-power, 2-mana haster. Like, that's totally fine in our deck. But in the late game, what it can do is you can pay 5 mana for it, and it's a 2-mana 3-power haster, and you get to cast one of our burn spells from the graveyard for free, which is normally our Lightning Strike or our Play with Fire. If I told you I haven't died to this card multiple times for 5 mana, I would be totally lying to you. Like, when you cast this card for 5 mana, it's insane. When you cast it for 2 mana, it's pretty good. We're also playing Cemetery Gatekeeper. This is kind of like our standard Eidolon clone. What we do when we play this card, it's a 2-power, 2-mana first striker, which is already, like, fine. But we're able to exile a card out of our opponent's graveyard. Normally, it should be a card that they use a lot. So it's really good if we hit instant or sorcery. And if they ever cast a card that shares type with that, they get dealt 2 damage. So it's kind of a must answer for the more controlling decks. It's a first striker, so it's also, like, fine in the aggro mirror matches, and ends up being quite a bit of free damage if it goes unanswered and you exile the right thing. It's also, like, accidental graveyard hate because it exiles a card in the graveyard, so that's always really good to play in the main deck because there are some reanimator decks in Standard. We play Lightning Strike. It's just 2 mana 3 damage. Like, of course, you play a card that good. Similar to Play with Fire, removes things from the battlefield, burns face, does everything you want to do, and our best target for Bloodthirsty Adversary. Rada's Firebrand is a pretty awesome card. So 2 mana 3/1. And when it attacks a target plant, block this turn. It's kind of like the standard version of Uncrop Crasher. If you guys remember that card where you could exert it and make something not block. This is just when it attacks a creature with power less than Rada's Firebrand can't block this turn. A relevant thing with Domain, we can give it +2/+2, so it can make things that are even larger not be able to block Rada's Firebrand, or block anything this turn. And that only costs 5 mana, which we get to a reasonable amount of the time with this deck. Because remember, Domain, we're going to have mountains, so that'll be reduced to 5 mana down from 6. Removing even one thing to block, we're so fast. Normally they trade early and often, so making one thing not block is often the end of the game for our opponents. Reckless Stormseeker is one of the best cards in the deck. So it's a werewolf, so it flips into a better version of itself. But you play this, and then it gives everything in your deck haste. So you play this on turn 3, it can give itself haste, and is a 3-power haster for 3 mana at its worst. And then if you untap with it, you can play one of your 2-drops. One of the best combos in the deck is playing Stormseeker, and then Stormseeker on turn 3, turn 4, Rada's Firebrand, burn spell the second blocker down, Rada's Firebrand gets haste, that other blocker can't block, you win the game. Also, by pumping it up with Reckless Stormseeker, even larger things can't block. When it flips into the werewolf form, it is bigger, and it makes things even bigger, and gives them trample in addition to haste. This card's amazing. Then Thundering Raiju, which is one of our big payoff cards, a 3/3 with haste that puts a +1/+1 counter on another creature. It can mess up combat really bad this way, strategically putting our +1/+1 counters. And then it deals damage to the opponent, where X is the number of modified creatures you control other than Thundering Raiju. So if you start pumping things up, if Kumano Faceless Kakazan has a counter on one of your creatures, if you play the Shivan Devastator, which we'll talk about in a second, all of those things count as modified creatures. So often it's a haster that can deal 1 to 3 damage on its attack and hits our opponent and pumps up a creature, and that's amazing. It's so good. And then as a 2-of is Shivan Devastator. So Shivan Devastator as a 2-of, it's just something you can dump your mana into in the late game. It counts as a modified creature. It's a flyer with haste. I found that if my opponent stopped my initial assault, it was really hard to get back into the game because I'd end up with 5 or 6 mana and just like play out all the cards in my hand and then just lose. And being able to peel Shivan Devastator off the top, or even play it for 3 as a 2/2 flyer haster, is pretty powerful in this deck. One card you might be confused I'm not playing is Squee. So Squee, the issue with Squee is that it is not Goblin Rabblemaster. Every time I casted Squee, it was really, really bad, and I never was able, and even when I recurred it, I was often so far behind, it just didn't matter. It attacks really poorly, yeah, it makes guys, but it is just not good, people. It is not Goblin Rabblemaster. I do not recommend playing Squee. And then our sideboard is pretty interesting. So we have a transformational sideboard where we transform into sort of a mono-red control deck where we take out a lot of our early aggression and just keep in our big heavy hitters, bring in our Chandras. So that's why we have all of these removal spells. Is against most decks, we just turn into a mono-red control deck. Against like the mid-range decks that bring in a lot of removal against us, we stop that by just like bringing out the stuff that removal is good against. And then we run a 2 of Unlicensed Hearse for that graveyard hate to help out Cemetery Gatekeeper with making sure our opponents don't do anything super unfair. Against control decks that don't play a lot of creatures, but they're playing a lot of removal, unfortunately these cards don't do anything. So we kind of just have to bring in the Chandra Dress to Kill as a card that is harder to answer and hope for the best. A Braid is also incrementally really, really good against the Anvil deck, which is pretty solid right now. So there you have it. That is Mono Red Aggro in Standard. It's a pretty straightforward deck. It's super fun to play, and especially while Standard is still trying to figure itself out, attacking it with a hyper-aggressive deck, I think, is a good idea. If you like this video and want to see more videos like this, please be sure to like and subscribe. Check me out on Twitch. Links are above me and in the description to all the other social medias as well. Thank you all so much for watching. I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.